I don't know if you've noticed, but the things being manufactured in Pakistan are getting larger. Even the gears are being made this big now. It seems like their manufacturing capability has increased. The iron piece before us, measuring the radius of the large gear with a ruler, marking it on the ground, mixing sandy soil with a mixer, and filling the pit in the ground. This is preparation for making molds. Pakistan is using tools to make these molds, completing them piece by piece like a pizza. This mold is no small feat. It's both like a large windmill and a mold for pizza all in one. Pakistan presses several tons of iron blocks onto the mold to prevent the molten iron from flowing back during pouring. This prevents any hollow spaces inside the gear. Then they melt the scrap iron in a furnace. Once the iron reaches a certain temperature, it becomes molten iron. The molten iron is poured into the mold. After cooling, it becomes a new part. This method has been used since the 20th century and remains an important means of modern production. Despite Pakistan's slightly backward technology, they are striving to produce high-quality products. As a result, Pakistan's industry continues to advance. Pakistan's spirit of daring to practice is worth learning. Now, the molten iron is slowly poured into the mold. From the pouring mouths on both sides, the temperature in this environment is very high. This supersized gear requires an enormous amount of molten iron. Now, we can see that the molten iron has overflowed from the vents. This proves that the entire mold has been filled with molten iron. Once the molten iron cools, the gear pulled out from the mold will have this shape. It's somewhat reminiscent of ancient cartwheel hubs. Placing the gear on the lathe, the next step is to polish away the surface burrs. Still the same saying, gleaming is the sole criterion of Pakistan's productivity. If the product isn't shiny, Pakistan won't stop. The older gentleman wearing sunglasses in front of us strictly adheres to this principle. Look at the iron scraps on the ground, falling like feathers in a snowstorm. There are still some hollow holes alongside the middle axis of this gear. After all, the mold is so big, the iron naturally flows. This thing resembling a wolf's fang is actually a carriage gear. Its material is even harder, so cutting it is like cutting through clay. The imprints on the gear after cutting are remarkably beautiful. Then, using a grinder to polish the other areas. If you're careless, you'll get cut. Then, a layer of rust-proof spray had been applied to the gear. The supersized gear is now completed.